Hi, my name is Pavel, and I'm a gamebook author and publisher. And with me today, there is Dave Morris, legendary creator of gamebooks, author of Fabled Lands, many fighting fantasy games, and Heart of Ice. And today, we will talk about how the world will look like in 2050. And we are doing it because we wrote a book together called Whispers Beyond the Stars, and the action of this game book takes place in 2050. So, Dave, why 2050?
Well, that's a good question. If I can just rewind 50 years or so, um, H.P. Lovecraft, when I was a teenager, was in all the bookshops in paperbacks. They suddenly released all the H.P. Lovecraft stuff. And I think I read almost everything that he wrote at the time. And I didn't really appreciate until much later the progress, the kind of change in his attitude to horror and fantasy over the course of his life. And towards the end, I think particularly, he was trying really to create this idea of cosmic horror that would be really about the whole alienation of human beings from the cosmos. And he wanted to create a very unsentimental kind of horror. And I mean, obviously, I love playing things like Call of Cthulhu, but there is a coziness to the whole kind of pulp era 90. They're hard-boiled adventure stories with tentacles rather than the cosmic horror that Lovecraft was really striving for. And I think if he were alive today, he'd be setting his stories. His stories, his best stories, were set in his own time. And so you and I discussed it. We thought we could set it right now, but then there's often mention of Robert W. Chambers' The King in Yellow stories, particularly The Repairer of Reputations, in which Chambers uh, satirically predicted what America would be like 25 years after the time he was writing. We thought, let's bring in a blend of that so we're not bound by, we could go out of date with anything we say is going to happen in 2026. AI will probably be far ahead of anything we could guess by the end of 2026. So better to go forward to 2050. And I think in it both future proofs us against getting anything wrong. It nods towards Chambers's approach in King in Yellow, and in particular, it honors Lovecraft's goal with the mythos, which is to create this very unsentimental, um, genuinely quite terrifying sense of horror, which I hope we've managed to do.
And I believe Chambers had a very good intuition in terms of how the world will change, but not in terms of technology, because in
Mm-hmm.
his vision, of course, he missed the cars, right? And he missed uh, in other technologies advancements, but he caught this, let's say, military approach and this military intense uh, ghost of times, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
he was writing it by the end of 19th century, and then the First World War and the Second World War came. So he had this feeling, right, that this is coming, but he was rather used a very let's say direct interpolation. So, but how do you think these geopolitical trends will evolve until 2050? How the world will look like 2050 from geopolitical point of view?
Yeah, well, we're in a period of a great deal of change, obviously. Even if you left the politics aside, of course, there's the technology, but we'll get to that later. The um, current politics is very finely balanced, it seems to me. I was talking to a German friend last night, and he was very confident that Ukraine would hold out against Russia. Um, I probably take a more pessimistic view now that Donald Trump seems to be following the party line of Vladimir Putin, that if Ukraine falls, then Putin will control the largest army in Europe by a long way, and he'll have the military infrastructure of Ukraine, probably a bit more efficient than the military infrastructure of Russia. So I think that will cause a, even if America were still strongly behind NATO, we would have a bit of a resurgence of the old USSR in the terms of the Russian Federation expanding militarily, much as it did in the 50s and 60s. And I think couple that with the cold civil war in America at the moment between the two very polarized factions, um, which I think in our story leads to the many of the flyover states splitting off and becoming the free states, and Canada and the west and east coast become the new, as it were, United States. So you end up with three big powers. Clearly, China, nobody disputes in the real world, China is going to be a very big player in the 21st century. The new Russian Federation, and what remains or what has become of the United States. And those are the three big powers in the world by 2050.
Yeah, and we got this assumption to our game book, and what I personally think, I think that it regarding the Europe and Russia, it does not need to look like that Russia will conquer the Western countries, like for example Poland or
Mhm.
Germany going later on, but it is sufficient for them to have very strong army and to get the political dominance, and
Mhm.
their demands, right, will be accepted because there is no other way.
Yeah.
If, like in our vision, US will be divided and will step out from Europe, right, then there will be no force to just deny Russian demands. So it does not mean that, for example, I will see Russian in Warsaw where I live,
No.
but, for example, they can require that here in Poland we cannot work on the nuclear power, right?
Mhm.
Or, for example, we need to buy more Russian goods, right?
Mhm.
Or, for example, we cannot export so much, and so on. And just the fact that they have this strong army, right? Um, it means that they just can make these demands, and we need
Yeah.
just to follow, right?
Yes. I think, yeah, I don't see Putin's goal of sweeping back the entire old Iron Curtain. But I think you'll see some countries, perhaps like Hungary, aligning. I could see that, say, Orban or his successors would think, oh, the situation in Belarus is pretty good, like be a close ally to Putin. And he keeps going and meeting Putin. So, I think he probably thinks that's a great, goal. You can be president for life once you've got Putin on your side. I think Putin would then leave, the rest of Europe, the Western bits, as you say, Finland would be okay and Poland, but he can still dictate terms once he's in that position. So, yeah, I think that at least maybe the scenario will be much more cheerful in real life, but that's the scenario in our book anyway.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And what about Asia?
Well, I think China will, hugely dominate, already has enormous influence over. I mean, it's very handy in a way for China to have North Korea because, North Korea is quite dependent on China, but equally, there's a level of deniability. It's like an attack dog that China feeds, but, it can always say, well, we didn't know it was going to do that. So I think that situation will continue because it's in China's interests. Um, but China really is extending its soft power all around the world, and America has stepped back to leave a vacuum. I mean, honestly, I'd go and talk to China right now about AI development and all kinds of research and technology partnerships that America are just going to not, or it seems, are not going to continue with. And I think Xi is he's a grown up, so he will sensibly look at all this and think, yeah, this is an opportunity for China um, to really increase its influence with not necessarily militarily. He might put pressure on Taiwan in the same way that you were just saying, renewed Russian Federation can put pressure on Europe without having to go to the bother of, a costly invasion. Um, just a blockade would start to show who's in control there, and there's no way Donald Trump even knows where Taiwan is on a map, so he's not going to get involved in it. So again, I think that we're going to see this consolidation of these powers, and then there'll be all the other states like Europe and most of the Southeast Asian ones. I don't know about India. We didn't. India is clearly significant in our story, but I don't think we really talk about. I mean, it clearly is not going to be a minor player, but with China right there, it's more like the I don't know. This is an invalid comparison, but it might end up the Canada to China's America or something like that. I don't know.
Mhm, mhm. And geopolitics connects to the technology and energy, and of course, energy is the most important factor. So how do you think? What kind of energy are we going to use in 2050?
I think I'm hoping we'll we'll just be beginning to get reliable fusion, you know, spread out properly. I think we'll probably in the next 10 years, we'll have viable fusion reactors, but it will take time for the technology to then be spread out. But that would, of course, massively reduce the cost of energy to near zero. And once you have unlimited energy, there are all kinds of things you can do. But I think we'll be on the cusp of that in 2050. And by the end of the century, if there hasn't been a nuclear war or another pandemic or something, I could imagine that with fusion, we could have a really much better life style for most people on the planet. We could have, but that doesn't mean to say that will actually be delivered, because I know when, for example, Demis Hassabis, who I used to work for, and he set up DeepMind, and he often talks about radical abundance, that when we have fusion, then clean water will be free to everybody. And I think, well, yeah, as long as the dictators of those countries give access, everyone on the planet could have a great life, but the political situation may be what stops them having a great life. But I think the
It
technology
is.
will be there by the end of the century, certainly.
And also, we may end up in a situation that there will be different sources of energy in different of these political entities. So, for example, in US and in Western, maybe in US they will have a fusion, and as well in China, but maybe in Russia they will still depend on coal and gas because it's easy to get right there. And also, this is the question about the ideological reasons for European Union that sticks to this,
Yeah.
wind and solar energy, although it is much more expensive, right? But this is the question, right? How it will go in the future.
Yeah, well, it's always difficult because you think if you rationally predict what the technology should provide, you get to one conclusion. But despite what Aristotle said, there's a lot of evidence that man is not a rational animal. And for example, if Putin had spent the money that he spent trying to invade Ukraine on geothermal energy technology, Russia would have energy prices a quarter of anywhere else in the world if just that money had been spent, because geothermal is a huge, effectively untapped resource. There's new drilling techniques mean you can go far deeper and have much more effective geothermal energy. Even in, he could be doing that in Siberia, and there's lots of areas where there would be no repercussions to the degree of drilling and fracking they'd have to do. And it would have delivered a lot of clean, free energy, nearly free energy. But people don't do that. They go to war instead and just waste life and resources utterly pointlessly. And I guess history suggests that's not going to stop. So human beings will still be doing that in 100 years' time, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you are right. This is very right observation. But now let's imagine that we have the unlimited energy. And what does it mean? Does it mean right now we can produce a lot of robots and we can produce a
Mhm.
lot of AI, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, robotics, I think, is another thing that's going to, we'll see changing just, the degree to which AI has changed in the last 3 or 4 years. It's funny because I was sitting with a group of friends and we were playing a board game. We had like a 50-page rule book, and I'd fed the rule book to Notebook LM. So I was asking it some questions. There was one little abstruse point that it got something wrong. And bearing in mind, the six people playing the game were constantly getting things wrong with the rules. It got one thing wrong, and everyone said, "Oh, it's useless, this AI." And I said, 3 years ago, you would have thought talking to a machine would be miraculous. Now, if it makes one mistake in the course of a 6 hour board game, you think it's useless. So people have very quickly become complacent about, and I keep hearing people talking about hallucination, but I find AI very, very useful if you use it sensibly and you're careful with it, and it will only improve. And I think that sudden leap will also occur now with robotics, and that over the next 5 or 10 years, we will have really effective household scale robots. And certainly, this the supposition in Whispers Beyond the Stars is that by 2050, most people in the West, at any rate, can have personal robots. We call them Fridays because partly because of the idea of man or gal Friday, but also because the first corporation to develop them in our world is the Faraday Corporation. So they end up becoming the Hoover, the brand name for all domestic robots. And they're not necessarily big, expensive combat machines or anything. They're just a robot that can take the rubbish out and boil the kettle and feed the cat, and also catch up, plug into your emails and answer emails, although probably a separate agent you'd have doing that. But it's a useful companion driver, although again, the cars can be self-drive by then, perhaps. That's an interesting question because I think we need genuine general intelligence for fully reliable, like Type 5 self-drive cars. And I don't think LLMs are necessarily the route to AGI. So we do suggest in 2050 that there are companies still working on AGI, but they're working on different substrates. They're not just using digital neural nets, but in fact, one of the companies is Optimind, and they're working on genetically engineering octopus brains, partly because it's politically easier to get away with than genetically engineering monkey brains, for example, but also because it's a different kind of mind. And they realize we don't need more human like minds, we need another kind of general intelligence. And so Optimind is working on this kind of, it may be a simulation or an emulation of an octopus brain rather than an actual octopus brain, but that AGI is just coming online. And so the super intelligence that people talk about now is really just about available in 2050 to limited corporations, but everybody has access to a personal robot they can talk to. That's about as intelligent as an average teenager, let's say. Not to insult teenagers, we've all been one, but they're not fully conversant with the entire world, but they're pretty good. They can do most things.
And now I'm thinking that when we started to write this book, and it was 2 years ago, right?
Mhm.
We were too pessimistic. I think uh, I think it will come earlier.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is always the problem. If you do anything in science fiction, you think the minute you finished didn't I say there was might have been Ian Banks or one of the authors had said it's like carrying an ice cream cone on a hot day, you know you're going to lose the ice cream before you finished it. And yeah, I think the pessimism is partly because there's still a validity to dystopian futures, even if we hope they don't come true. Um, I can still watch Blade Runner, technically, supposed to be set, isn't it, 2015 or so? I can't remember the actual year in Blade Runner, but we don't expect that future, but it's still a fun science fantasy. So let's hope that in predicting a dreadful future, we've dealt with that curse, and actually the real human race will get a much nicer future.
Let's hope. So, for example, we were thinking that the robots will not work on construction site because they are not so much agile, and it's better to
Mm,
hire just people
yeah.
to do it. But let's look right now
No.
what Chinese companies was
Oh
were
yeah. And
presenting like a couple of days ago, I believe. So they presented the robot with the muscles that are hydraulically
mm,
moved, and it was just moving like a human, right?
yeah. No,
So
I
so
need.
maybe in 5 or 6 years we will see it on the streets,
Oh,
right?
I
And
think
we
we
are thinking
will.
right now on 25 years, right?
In fact, I was reading about this just yesterday about the problem we have now is that they said current robots are idiot athletes, that they really are very capable of a great deal of agility. And in fact, manual dexterity will be only a matter of a year or so off. Um, but that they don't know how to deal with the wider world because they don't have a full general intelligence. Um, it's not just general. They aren't currently, they haven't yet been able to train on the real world. But of course, training in virtual environments will be a good step towards that. And then I can't remember the name of the company that's releasing the 1,000. They're trying to sell for, I think it's $50,000, a bunch of robots which are very slow and a bit useless, and you have to have constant human intervention. But the point is to get those robots to tell the people buying them, you are helping in the development, because once they're in a home, they'll be learning, and they'll all be learning. So it's like Teslas on the road they all update from the information each Tesla has received. So I think it will be the same with robots. Once you get them into actual environments, it will be an exponential curve. And yeah, I think that where we said they weren't going to be very agile, it was like a game. We had to give human beings something, some advantage, and otherwise the entire story would have been robots are better at everything. You have nothing to bring. So we had to let the human being be more agile than the
Yeah,
robots.
yeah.
Yeah.
So let's imagine the world where we have a plenty of robots and everybody can have a robot as a personal assistant.
Hmm.
There is also very advanced AI,
Hmm.
and the jobs are in decline because we can observe it right now. And I know that there was an argument that, okay, in the past, also the jobs were disappearing, right? But new
Hmm.
jobs were coming. But what we are observing last 2 years, the jobs are disappearing, but new jobs are not coming,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So if these trends will go up, then I mean there will be no jobs anymore, right?
It's an interesting. I mean, if I went back to sort of 17th, early 18th century France, and I said to the average aristocrat, "What about a job?" He'd just think I was mad. He'd go, "Jobs are for peasants. What are you talking about? Why would I have a job?" And if I even said, "What about an education, some skills?" Go, "I don't need any of these things. What are you talking about? All I need to be able to do is ride, go hunting, go to parties. That's their life." Now, again, in a perfect world, if we have a huge workforce of robots, human beings ought to be able to all live as aristocrats. In a perfect world, we should be getting a universal basic. Effectively, we'd have an army of workers willing to do everything we need, stronger, tireless, agile, and every human being should be able to live a life of leisure. And it's like Ian Banks's The Culture novels. The human life should become, ideally, a question of what do you want to do that fulfills you? Do you want to travel? Do you want to learn a musical instrument. All of these things you do because you enjoy them, not because you're trying to perform them. Not nowadays, if I learn an instrument, the way I'll think is, if I got really good, I wonder if people would pay to hear me play it. You play the bagpipes, right? So that's a thing which is fulfilling in itself, but we're kind of programmed from birth to start thinking, how do we make money from any skill? I enjoy writing, but I still have to think, how do we sell it to people? Um, but in the future, Montaigne didn't expect to sell his essays, and they're great. He just wrote them because he enjoyed writing them. So we could have that kind of future, but again, it depends on people not depriving other people of it. If we could just think, what's the point of arguing over if resources are almost unlimited, why argue over them? But I'm willing to bet there will be plenty of people who think this is an opportunity to stop other people from getting something, and then I can control them. It seems a crazy way to think, but I'm sure there are plenty of people who will think that way. So we won't get that perfect future.
And I think this intuition is right because when you take a look into the past, I mean, right now, our way of living is like 500 years only kings could live, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you
Yeah,
have breakfast in 5 minutes,
yeah,
right? You have light when you want.
yeah,
You have any beverage you want, right? You have a lot of meat that you can have. If you don't want, you don't you don't
yeah.
have it, right? But you
I can
have all
have
these
chilled
things that
drinks on.
500 years only kings could have, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So considering all of what we said, so uh, do you think that our future is rather bright or rather dark?
Well, it becomes very dark once. But by the way, I've got to say, everyone says Call of Cthulhu, but and there's many arguments about how to pronounce it. But I believe that Lovecraft originally meant the CT part, clear sound, and the H, Hulu, to be a separate. It's not TH, so the sound isn't supposed to be Cthulhu. It's supposed to be
Okay.
Cthulhu. But on the other hand, it's too late to fight that battle. So I'll say Cthulhu for the rest of this. Once for the want of a better word, Cthulhu mythos entities come into the picture, everything's going to be dark anyway. And the challenge really is to make sure that it's darker in a way that human history, because human history is full of very dark moments, but I guess they're not a threat to our very feeling of safety in the universe. Your life could be in danger, but the idea that even sanity is meaningless is the thing that is most sort of threatening. So that idea of a really bleak, uncaring um, entities of such power and such ancient lineage that human beings are nothing to them, just ants. I think that we're putting that into a some not exactly dystopian future because we do have concepts like the universal basic income. It's just not the basic one isn't very good. We call it living on the dollar, so like the dole in ancient Rome. But if you live on the dollar, the word tells you that you're not going to be having a lavish lifestyle. Once the Cthulhu entities come into the picture, there's a real existential crisis. There could be, that we could be heading for an extinction event for mankind at that point. So I think it's kind of like a future that has some. You could live in our future without Cthulhu, and you could have a nice life, but most people aren't having a great life, but they're getting by. It's not. They're not um, dying of starvation, most people, but once the threat starts to come in from outside, the whispers beyond the stars, then I think it starts to become very dangerous indeed.
Absolutely, you are right. All right, Dave, thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you, Pavel.
And to all who is watching us, please consider going to GameFound, find Whispers Beyond the Stars, and get your copy of the book. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.